Welcome, people. David, Barbara, welcome back to the Leaders Who Care series. Great to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
Great to be here as always with you, Mark, and great to be here with you, Barbara.
Thank you, David.
All right. So I don't have an official title for this, but I was thinking something to the effect of, blockchain and the impact on real people, something to that effect. But it is about blockchain and all things related. And I'm super glad that we have both of you here to share your insights, your stories, any good jokes you have, and stuff like that. So, but if you can start briefly, I think a lot of the people know who you are, but start briefly with a brief intro and maybe something you've never told anybody before that you'll want to release right now. So I'll go old school and go ladies first.
I am Barbara Bickham. I am the founder of Trailyn VC. We are raising a pre-seed US-based deep tech fund for diverse founders. Blockchain, AI, AR, IoT, quantum computing is what we will be investing in. I also run Trailyn Ventures. We inform and educate investors and companies on emerging tech, deep tech, kind of those same technologies. And then I'm also the host of the Female VC Lab podcast for the journey of female investors. So that's me in a nutshell. David, I'll kick it over to you.
All right, but you didn't tell your secret that you didn't reveal to people.
My one secret is, which is not really a secret, but so it will be a completely unsecret secret, is that I really like pizza. Pepperoni. There's no such thing as too much pepperoni pizza.
Excellent. I think I have my son, my 4-year-old son would definitely agree with you. He's a big fan of pepperoni as well. So you are in good company. So yeah, my name is Dr. David Bray. I wear many different hats. The hats I think I'm wearing here is I am both a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council as well as at the Stimson Center. Both are non-partisan nonprofits in which I provide recommendations to world leaders, both in the public sector and the private sector, on the impacts of data and technology on societies, on communities, on geopolitics. And also separately in the private sector, recently have formed what's called Lead, Do, Adapt Ventures, in which it's the same thing. Instead of doing it through either the Atlantic Council or the Stimson Center, but in the for-profit sector, I'm on retainer to certain companies to also help them navigate the turbulence that we're experiencing, both the opportunities and the upsides of technologies, but the things we need to address and to make sure that it brings up everybody, it uplifts everybody, and that we need to recognize both historical and current inequities that need to be brought to bear when we think about how these data and technology initiatives are rolled out. In terms of something I have never told anyone, well, at least with you, Mark, and I don't know if I've ever done it on any Zoom conversations, I have not revealed that I'm a big fan of both the Thin Man movies, the black and white movies, as well as Cary Grant. I like a good mystery, particularly North by Northwest is probably my favorite film that I like to watch.
I got to start asking favorite films. That's a good idea. So thanks for sharing that. So, I've got to know you guys pretty well and consider you friends, but yeah, I really respect the expertise that you bring to the table. But you've had amazing journeys, and we all have aligned values to make a difference, make an impact, as well as making money. So before we go too much farther into some of the details, can you share with us when you discovered your interest in making a difference and basically why you do what you do? So I'm gonna start with David this time.
Oh, I was gonna let Barbara go, but all right. When did I discover? I don't know. I think I would just say, I tell people I fell on my head at an early age. I was fortunate enough. My father was a Methodist minister. My mom was a school teacher. And so they were my role model. And so it was really just sort of wanting to do what they did because they were passionate about it. My mom's skill set was both within the church. She was obviously she was a part, even though it wasn't her career, she was able to bring together people, make them feel comfortable, make them feel welcome, and sort of create a sense of hospitality. And I think that's something I try to do when I lead groups, whether they be initiatives that are in the private sector or the public sector. My father's skill sets were healing fragmented congregations and capital planning. And I realized the older I've gotten in a lot of different tech and data ventures, there's oftentimes when you have a rift that's either dividing the team about where do we want to go, or some past grievance or something like that. And that one way to solve it is both by listening to everybody, trying to give them a chance to shift from being problem holders to being problem solvers, and then also have it be focused on a goal, some capital planning activity. So I think it was a very early age. I was fortunate enough, I went to public schools. And even in the public schools, they had a program both in my elementary school and middle school years, which were encouraging us to think about how we can make a difference and how we can play a role. And so that was just something I think that's just always been a part of me. And people say, like, why haven't I like formed my own like IPO or something like that? I'm not saying that you can't do that and also make a difference. It's just I always start with making an impact first and then figuring out everything else from there.
Yeah, it is true about schools. I do remember them encouraging us a lot back then to do things really good. Barb?
So David and I have very similar backgrounds in that way. My parents were also very influential in kind of that giving back. My parents, my mother was a housewife. So she had lots of time with us as children, and we were always getting involved in her volunteer activities and helping the church, helping her organizations, helping, put on these events that these massive events she would do throughout the city. So that was always kind of our philanthropic give back. And then for myself as an adult, I kind of always just carried that on as well. I work a lot with like the youth kids, because I feel like the kids are super important, training them in technologies and especially these new technologies is super important. My dad was also very philanthropic. He ran multiple, charitable organizations from the physician side. So, I mean, I think it's kind of just in our nature. My parents were also teachers at some levels. So, we have that ability to also give people a different and broader viewpoint from a teaching side as well. So
Super
very much
cool.
the same ever since I was very small. Right?
Yeah, my mom was home also most of the time, and home as in supposedly not working, but really working. And
It was a
24/7 job.
That's like a whole nother level of job.
Better believe it. If someone says, what experience do you have? Well, let's see. Buying groceries and doing this, doing a budget, doing, all the stuff you do at home, etc. Yeah, I always just ask, even before all this, I always asked, so do you work inside or outside the home? Because it really did make a difference. Hey, I'm going to show my age here a little bit. I remember when supply chains were called purchasing and warehousing and distribution and inventory and all that stuff, because I remember doing inventories December 31st at Deloitte for clients. One of them was going up an oil thing and putting the dipstick in to see how much oil was there December 31st. It was very exciting. And, so can you describe to us what your definition of blockchain is? And it's picked up a lot over the last few to several years, but when did you realize how important it was in all aspects? And you guys can do rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Who goes next?
I'll go, David, because I have the undisputed 4-word definition of what a blockchain is. I teach this to children, so to 5-year-olds. So like, here's what it is. Blockchain, 4 words. So it's decentralized or distributed. It's not in one location. It is encrypted, private and protected, right? Can't really hack in there. It is immutable. That's a permanent record. It's there forever, even longer than on the internet. And then it's also a ledger, debit and credit, 2 sides. That's it. That's all it is. That's the essence of what a blockchain is. So now, when did I realize it was important? I think around 2015, I heard Andreas Antonopoulos talk about what is a blockchain is. Actually, I heard him talk about the Internet of Money. And when I heard that talk about the Internet of Money, I was like, oh, this is what a blockchain is. This is how this is going to kind of revolutionize things. And I looked at it beyond just the monetary or currency pieces of it. I recognize that it can also apply to many other things. And so my belief is that blockchains will be all part of all infrastructure. Part of all infrastructure will be on a blockchain at some point. Now, does that mean your identity will be there? Probably. Does that mean, you know, other things will be on there? Probably. The real question is, what are we as people going to do with these technologies, and how are we going to make sure that they're dealt with ethically, and that, you know, our data and information is truly ours moving forward?
Hey, David, before you go, I'd still like to hear your definition, but I think that's a good segue also to what we were chatting about a while back about, you know, how it enables decentralized data storage and processing and reconciliation without needing central servers and whatnot. I want to get into trust later too on this, but if you can chat towards that, that'd be great.
Sure. We have to recognize that where does the blockchain come from? Because I think it's worth at least recognizing its roots. And it came from the dark web in a way that people wanted to have confidence when it came to reconciling, in this case, sometimes illicit payments, a way that it could be done without being concerned that someone's going to change that ledger. And so that gets to the immutable part, which is it has an immutable audit log. And immutable audit logs have actually existed for quite some time. You can go back to the tragic events of 9/11. Afterwards, part of the recommendations that flowed from the commission was that we needed to have immutable audit logs as a way to protect privacy. So you could actually record who's looking up a record and things like that. So you can have immutable audit logs without the blockchain. Similarly, you can have distributed ledgers without immutable audit logs, but then of course you have to trust that those ledgers aren't changed. And so the blockchain is bringing both of those things together. In this case, it was for a not so good purpose for the dark web and for the Silk Road, but we can also think about uses we can use it for that could be good, where maybe you don't trust the ledger not to be changed. Maybe it's a case where you're operating in an environment in which land records are in dispute, or you're worried that someone might go and they may call in their family member and decide to suddenly say that the land it used to own to you, they're going to give to somebody else and they're going to change that ledger, and you'll need to check it. So it may not necessarily be something that those of us in the United States immediately feel the need for, because we do have a systems of law and there's recourse and there's ways of doing checks. But there may be other environments where that may be more of a need. The immutable audit log part is interesting because that way it's a way of having attestation that no one has gone back and changed what history recorded. Now, there are some risks with blockchain. There is what's called a 51% attack, in which if you have 51% of the nodes in a blockchain network, you can change what the consensus is. And so it'll get recorded as to what the consensus of 51% of the nodes are. That doesn't mean it's right, it's just what's recorded. And so I share that because as we look at using these technologies, I think we need to be aware of both the upsides as well as the challenges. One of the big challenges with blockchains is scaling. The blockchain that is currently in use at the moment, when you get to about 1 million nodes, starts to slow down and start to get a little peaky and slowy. That doesn't mean we won't figure out ways to address that, but that is something that when people are looking to adopt blockchain for massive scale, if they're thinking about having 100 million people use it, each of them having their own version of a ledger, that might be problematic. And so there are ways we can think about and navigate this as we do it. I just shared that because I come from the school that recognizes that I personally believe that it's the choices we use involving technology that determine whether it's good or bad outcomes. And so it's really what I like to talk about is the choices as to how we're going to use blockchain, whether it is to deal with environments where you don't have trust with what's being done with the data, or you want to have multiple copies of it stored in multiple places to reduce the risk of any one person changing what that ledger says.
So, you know, it's when I not first heard about blockchain, but the interesting story that I remember when I first heard about blockchain a number of years back is this, you know, Nigerian lady that's bringing sugar or whatever to, you know, and it's not getting recorded, and Nestle is the company getting it, but and the middlemen and the whole bit, and it actually gives her a chance to actually have a business that maybe she can get microloans from, and maybe then she's got a business and her family's feeling, you know, with some dignity, they actually got something going, and et cetera, et cetera. It makes a social impact. Can you guys talk about how, with corporates aligning now that, you know, social impact is as important to, and maybe even more important to doing better in business than not? Do you find corporates recognize that that's a good social impact for that Nigerian lady way back there? And is that too simple an example, or is that really happening?
So I'll jump on that one because it looks
I'll
like
let you take that one while I'm rejigging myself. Sorry.
no worries, it's okay. So I'll jump on that one, Barbara.
And then I will
Before I
respond.
jump to corporate, I might say I had an experience once in 2009. I was in Afghanistan, and I was working with both NATO and humanitarian efforts there. And one of the things that they did was they switched from doing payments of cash in person for those that were assisting with humanitarian efforts and efforts on the ground to actually doing electronic payments. And by doing that switch, all of a sudden we had people coming in saying, "Thank you for the raise." And we're like, "We didn't give you a raise." And what you realize is that when you were doing cash payments, unfortunately, there was a system of graft, there was a system of corruption. And so the people that were doing the work were not getting all the money they were actually owed. And that was 2009. And obviously before some of the things that we've seen advance with blockchain and other technologies. So I would say for corporates, what one hopes that they'll begin to realize is we operate in a world in which, unfortunately, there are still inequities, there is still graft, and there's still corruption in some parts of the world. And as much as we want to change that, and we should work to change that, if you're operating in those environments, you may need to be culturally aware and try to implement solutions that empower, say, example, that woman in Nigeria or things like that, to make sure that they're actually getting their actual due share of the work that they have produced and not having something skimmed off the top to somebody else. That's just one example. You are also seeing where hopefully this could be a case where people can record what they actually want to commit to or what they want to be involved with. It's not just about changing money. It can actually be an expression of ideas or actually expressing their votes in a way that cannot go back and have someone else change what that looks like. So I would say it's still early days. And again, blockchain is one instantiation of a distributed ledger and immutable audit log. I really think it's actually these two technologies both together, but also in some cases separate, where you can have confidence built because at least it's being shared with lots of people. And you also know through the immutable audit log that no one has gone back to change what's actually recorded in history.
Barb?
So if you think about, the time we're in right now, I was working with a company that was working with central bank digital currencies. And the thing that we were discussing there, which is in our white paper, so I can discuss it here, is kind of like, how do we equitably distribute these payments to people, right? Because some people were still getting paper checks, some people were getting ATM debit cards, some people were getting nothing, some people were, it was depositing into the account of the third person that was filing their taxes. So it was a lot of confusion around how was this money getting distributed equitably to people, and there were inequities in that. And so we were having these conversations around what do payments look like to people, and that direct pay to a person. And one of the powers of the blockchains and the distributed ledgers, and it is the fact that it can go directly to the person, right? The transaction is a one-to-one transaction. It's not a one-to-many transaction, as David has kind of intimated, right? There could be a lot of intermediaries in the middle of many transactions now where, I'll call it leakage. There's leakage, right? And so your dollar is not necessarily a dollar. I mean, another place of that is if you think about, here in the US, we have people that send money back through wire, transfers, right? They'll wire or they'll do the MoneyGram or something to that effect. So like there's leakage there, right? So there's either a fee on top or a fee on the back or a fee on the top and on the back, right? Instead of you just, giving the money directly to your family. So there are these issues like that where it's like how, a blockchain is going to kind of disrupt these intermediaries. And is there really some, and so that's a social good, right? It's good that I can, wire money to my family and if cases are needed. But then is there any will, we talk about these corporates, how much will do they have to really have that system change and evolve?
Well, that's amazing. Going back to the Nigerian woman for a minute, two parts there. A lot of people aren't going to be technically or technologically adept at everything going on. So how do we and who make sure that that Nigerian woman or any other woman or man or what out there, knows even about this to do it? And secondly, is there a way that it's potentially getting rid of the middleman, if you will, for corporates even better this way?
I'll go first, David, if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead.
So for corporates, yes, it actually is better, because, and I think for the Nigerian woman, it's actually better. And, Africa has evolved, they have the M-Pesa early, they have a lot of the wireless infrastructure early. So they were a little bit ahead of the United States. I think us as the United States is very behind in the cryptocurrency, digital currency, blockchain areas because of the regulatory uncertainty, even still to this day. So I think these other countries are going to evolve and solve these problems in a better and faster way, just like the M-Pesa got solved. So if you think of like kind of one of the very first digital currencies, that's kind of was it, right? You had a phone and you can kind of text and you kind of had information and you could text back and then it paid, right? So it's no difference. That was kind of the first direct paying platform in M-Pesa. So from a corporate side, I mean, it could actually speed up their vendor payments to themselves. I mean, if you think about the velocity of also inflows of money and how it could be really sped up. It's interesting. I wired money somewhere and first of all, it was a headache. I missed the cutoff. And then once you miss the cutoff of the wire, then you got to go the next day. So then I went the next day. So like, okay, one day down. Day two, I went early and still like almost missed the cutoff, but I got the money wired. And then they said, oh, this is going to take 5 days. Okay, I should have just sent them a Bitcoin and it would have taken me 30 minutes, right? Think of the speed up of that from a business side, right? So if I'm a woman in Nigeria and I get my cryptocurrency, whatever it is, I'll just say, or token, whatever that is, then, and I can get it in 30 minutes versus a day or 2 days or 5 days or however long the system takes. Like, isn't that changing my life fairly immediately?
To build on what Barbara said exactly, I think the United States has the challenge of we were leading the way in the 60s and 70s and 80s with electronic payments. And so that legacy burden now holds us back from being hungry as to what's next. And so in some respects, we have to let go of the legacy. But that's hard because a lot of banks are still operating on 1950s or 1960s computer systems that they are really hesitant to try and update, both because there's a lot of baked in procedures and code that's in there. There's also a lot of security concerns that if you move to something new, as opposed to something you've done your best to build all these defenses around, are you at risk? But it's going to happen. And she mentioned central bank digital currencies. We've already seen Europe pilot a central bank digital currency. China has been piloting central bank digital currencies. Several other nations have intimated that they're thinking about this. I personally hope the United States pilots a central bank digital currency soon. I actually have a bottle of scotch on the line. If the new administration doesn't do it before it wraps up its term in 2024, I owe someone a bottle of scotch, but I'm saying this US administration will. We'll see. But I share that because with that as well, and it's not just about using blockchain in the financial sector, although that's the most immediate, we also need to be aware that there are choices as to how visible the ledger is to everybody. I mean, it does work well when people can see it, but there's also a concern there because now your transactions are visible. They could be audited. For those people that have bought Bitcoin and have not declared it to the IRS, you probably should consider declaring it to the IRS because guess what? The whole point of that immutable audit log is the IRS can probably figure out all the transactions that happen and what you bought. And that's not true for all things that happen in the space, but we need to be aware that as we move to a future that uses distributed ledgers and immutable audit logs to engender trust, we may also want to think about two things, which is when do we choose to make this visible and not, so that you have some locus of choice about your digital exhaust and when you make it visible. And then two, how do we make sure communities are involved so that this doesn't become a way to subjugate the communities, but instead the communities are actually empowered to make choices about how they can use their data. If their data is actually producing value, maybe they should get some equity or some return for the data that they've brought together as part of the community endeavor. And so let's make that real quick, and then I'll turn it back to both Barbara and Mark. But think about if we had some way of doing distributed ledgers about health in a city or in a community. And it was actually showing the efficacy of different interventions. We built a park over here, and people are sharing, basic statistics, not attributable to them, but basic statistics on their blood pressure, their quality of life. And maybe you find that if we build a park over here, collectively people's blood pressures have gone down by 10 or 15, and that's actually sizable and it's quantitative. That would be extremely valuable to inform public policy as to where we should place other parks if we're seeing cases where it's not as equitable. Some people don't have a park near them or something like that. And that could be valuable. But at the same time, we don't want to have their health data itself be exposed for themselves, because that's not the point of it. And it could be something where you could have a citizen jury or an ombudsman function overseeing a data trust or a data co-op that has brought together this collective data through the distributed ledger, through the immutable audit logs, to produce value for the city in terms of informing policymaking, or even just informing policymaking at the state level or the national level too.
Mhm.
That's actually pretty fascinating, and it kind of makes me think of another question I wanted to ask before about talent in general. An ombudsman that's going to oversee that. Are companies thinking about blockchain in sense of, well, do I need to have a CFO or a head of supply chain no blockchain now, like 100%? Do we need to have somebody working for the city to be in that position you talked about? Is that, I would think obviously it's going to change a lot of the talent qualifications, right?
I go quick and then I'll turn it over to Barbara. I would say anybody who is helping a organization or city or government think about how it's going to transform itself, this is a tool in the toolkit. It is not the only tool, but it is a tool in the toolkit, and there are other tools. But most importantly, whoever is leading it should not just understand what the technology can do, but understand the state of what people perceive about it, the empathy for how it's going to be addressed, and then also recognize that, again, intentionality is almost everything. And unfortunately, we live in a world in which it's all too easy to ascribe misinformation, disinformation to people, particularly governments, but companies as well can have misinformation attacks associated with their endeavor. And so that's why I'm such a big fan of, wherever possible, shining light and having a citizen jury or an ombudsman function of outside people coming in, because the company or the government can say, look, we're using it for good purposes, but that's going to sound self-serving. If they bring in outside people that are actually participating in that work, one, that's a good litmus check to actually check and see if you really are. They may actually test your assumptions, but then it's now these third-party advocates that are actually involved in the process as well, that are helping to guide it. And when you do get that concern that someone says you're not using it for the good purposes, or you do get that misinformation or disinformation attack, it's not just the company responding, it's actually now this third group of people.
So is that something, and I'll pass it to you, Barbara, is that something that, I used to work for Deloitte, it becomes like a Deloitte audit type of deal?
The way I look at it is slightly different than the way David looks at it. I think, I agree that you could have some kind of panel of people, and you probably should at some levels have some panel of people. But if you think about what's happening in the blockchain space, as far as like distributed autonomous organization, the DAOs, like, why would you have people do it up to a point, right? You would almost want the governance and the compliance to be done electronically. That's what I'll say, in kind of an electronic way. And then if there's some kind of exceptions or something needs to be ascertained or discerned, then you kind of kick it up to the human level. I do agree with David, though. I did work on several kind of smart city projects prior to the pandemic. And you absolutely have to understand the blockchain pieces, because blockchains create economies, right? This is what most people are kind of missing. Blockchains create economies. And if you look at a smart city, and kind of what David was saying, like, how do you then empower the people inside of the city? It could be with health outcomes. It could be with, are you having a food desert? It could be, are you having water shortages? How's your electricity usage? There's many other aspects around an individual outside of just financial that people could be incentivized to place their data. And that's why really, I think the blockchain could be powerful in really empowering your identity. So if you think about the concept of the digital twin, so you have your physical presence, you have your digital presence, or this meta thing that just happened, which is very a whole nother conversation. We'll have to have another day, Mark. But if you think about that virtualization of everything, I'll just say it that way. How is your data and your identity now, and like even your economic power, going to be surfaced in those kind of atmospheres and communities? It's you almost want at some level some type of autonomy there, but you also need the human. So it has to be some hybrid thing. Otherwise, computers can go kind of insane.
100%. And I want to just amplify, I agree with Barbara 100% that for compliance questions, you asked a question about Deloitte or things like that, that should be automated as much as possible. And then it goes to the humans for the exceptions. I mean, that's the nice thing about this technology that it allows is instead of having an annual audit, you could have a continuous audit that is always ongoing, which is much better. It is really for us as humans to make sure that we have identified the uses that we're comfortable with, the uses we're not comfortable with, to make sure that we are setting out the guidelines and just having sort of making sure that the data that we're employing is representative of the questions we want to ask. I mean, there's several cases where, for example, there was an app that came out of St. Petersburg, Russia, in which you could actually cartoonize your face. The trouble was, since it came out of St. Petersburg, Russia, when you hit the beautify button, they had not done a diverse sampling of what the possibilities were, and unfortunately made everybody's face lighter, which was wrong. That's not correct. It's an anathema. But that would have been a case where you wanted the humans to be involved to say, wait, something's wrong here. You don't have enough training data. What you're actually doing is leading you to a bad outcome that's socially incorrect, to raise that flag. And then actually being able to inform that. And so as we move to a future in which there is some autonomy to what's being done, whether it's with identity or with your data, you do want that to be as much as possible done behind the scenes in a continuous basis, but with humans and a diverse group of humans, not just a company or not just a few people making decisions to make sure that it's being used justly and correctly in a socially appropriate way.
Do you guys think that the whole privacy thing, what a technical way of describing it, huh? The whole privacy thing, that we've almost become, we talk about wanting privacy, but we've almost become numb to the fact that we don't have privacy anymore anyway, there's going to be some impact there. Obviously, with Facebook, everything going on there. And now we're talking about privacy and trust with blockchain. What do you think the mindset is, the feeling of people in general about all that?
I guess I'll jump on a hand grenade and then turn it over to you.
I'll follow up. That's a good question, Martha.
Yeah, I would say, so I've done a lot in the privacy space. In fact, I was part of a group activity called humanity.org and humanity.com back in 2018, 2019. That was a little bit ahead of its time, but it was actually looking at allowing you to have your own personal medical record on a distributed ledger so that you could choose who and where you wanted to share it for and what purposes. Ideally, if you wanted to share it for clinical trial purposes, you could actually get some remuneration directly to you. What people don't realize is the health records industry in the United States is at least a $16 trillion industry per year. But very little of that money goes to the actual patient. It is all being made by other intermediaries, as Barbara mentioned too, that's happening there. But if we could have some of those funds that are involved with the health record industry go back to the individual, that could pay for their insurance, that could help pay for treatments and care, and that could actually improve outcomes. Now, but that's got to be your choice. I think I am not willing to give up on privacy. I think if we give up on privacy, we've lost. We've become surveillance state, and that's not what I want to see happen. It's why I do what I do at the Atlantic Council as well as the Simpson Center, is to avoid becoming an autocracy and surveillance state. But it is about choice. I mean, when you think about it, when you go to fly a plane, you can choose to give a little bit of information. You'll get your ticket, but you still have to go through the long security line. You can give a little bit more information, do TSA pre. You can give a lot of information and have your biometrics on record and you go through clear, but that's your choice. You can also choose to give no information, but you're probably not going to board the plane. And you have to find some other way to get to where you want to go, either by bus or by car. Mm-hmm. And so I think we need to have more choice architectures that allow for individuality of choices to be made, as opposed to, I mean, let's face it, a lot of these apps right now that are rolled out, they look like they have a lot of different choices, but really it's just you either accept or you don't. If you don't accept, you don't get the app and you don't get to have the benefit of it. I'd love it to see more of a resostat. The other thing I would love to see happen, and unfortunately this is probably a public good that you couldn't monetize, else people wouldn't trust it. I'd love to see each of us have our own personal digital agent or avatar that is advocating on our behalf, whether it's through conversations on digital ledgers or other types of that, as to what we want done with our data on the internet. And so when you encounter an app, it's not just you trying to navigate and figure out its interface. It's actually having a conversation and saying, this is David. David has chosen to fall on this side of the equation when it comes to sharing data. If you want to use it for this purposes, you can. If you want to offer monetization, here are different options. But it's sort of taking out the headache of trying to navigate the umpteen different apps and services that are out there on your behalf. It's actually taking care of that. And it's actually having conversations that you and I are having through natural language processing, as opposed to go click all these different checkboxes to make it happen.
That's amazing. Barb?
I agree with David. I mean, privacy in this era is a binary choice, right? Yes or no. Like, yes, I want privacy. No, I don't want privacy. If you say, yes, I want privacy, then like you can't download the app, right? Or you can't use the service, or you can't read the article, or fill in the blank. You know, most things in life are not binary choices, right? Well, maybe do I want pizza or not? That's kind of a binary choice. But I mean, the reality is there's always a spectrum, right? Like maybe for the pizza place, they can have all my data because I want my pizza, right? And then maybe for the health records, no, I don't want you to have all my data. Or for Facebook, no, I don't want you to have all my data, right? So like, there's no like real choice as to how you can protect and preserve your identity. And then also, how can you really pull it all back, right? If I download all my, you know, the hundreds of pages of information off of any of these networks, then okay, it's off. So now how can I piecemeally put it back? Like, okay, maybe I just want to post on my page and that's fine. I don't need the friend graph. I don't need the social graph. I don't need the rest of it, right? How do I make that as a person, as an individual? And then how can I carry that to other things, right? Does the bank really have to have the Facebook thing? Does Amazon really have to have the Google thing? Does the, you know, does the pizza place have to have the health stuff? No, right? So how can you really shape and mold your kind of identity digitized? And how can blockchains help with that, right?
That's pretty fascinating. And I consider myself semi-educated. I don't know how other people grasp all that's been happening over the last 25 years. It's incredible. And the one thing I wanted to ask also is, blockchain is, rightly or wrongly, always been tied to crypto. Like they're together all the time. They're not together all the time, right?
100%. They're not together all the time. I mean, that it came out of that because, again, of its dark web origins, but you can definitely separate it. You can use it for healthcare data. You can use it for data equity. You can use it. I mean, you could have a distributed set of sensors. Maybe they're monitoring the fairness of electoral process. Maybe they're monitoring for climate change. So it's doing that with a distributed ledger and a mutable audit log as a way that everybody can see that, you know, either this election was held fairly, or here's what's happening in the environment in this space, that then scientists as well as the public can use it to make better decision making. And so you can definitely decouple them.
I agree with David. You know, all blockchains that I know of right now I call them tokens. I try not to use the word currency, cryptocurrency, because then you get the connotations of Bitcoin and Ethereum and those things. But it's beyond that. And most things, you know, most blockchains empower economies. And how are economies empowered, right? It could be empowered by many different ways. And David gave a few examples. You know, real estate is another very common example. Or the other very common example is, you know, I don't know why we're still using these 1934 stock purchase rules, but, you know, you can put stock transactions onto a blockchain, right? And it's very transparent. And I know, like, I purchased 5 shares of XYZ company, and, you know, those are my 5 shares. I got it at this price, and you know, so, or for any kind of investment transaction. So it is a little bit beyond just the cryptocurrency pieces. It can be used for many, many other things.
I can give you an example of well, I guess it was pre-COVID. I was in Geneva talking to a couple of senior people in some of the big financial institutions, and they were, what, 5 years away from retirement or whatnot. And they just said, I don't have the energy to learn all this. I'm going to just go through my 5 years and keep things the way they are. And good luck to whoever after that. I mean, that's what I saw there, which is kind of amazing. I understood where they're coming from, but kind of amazing. Real life stories before we kind of complete here. Can you guys give me maybe one or two examples of real great successes of blockchain, real stories if you have them?
Barbara, do you want to go first?
I have one. I actually am aware of a company that's streaming video on top of a blockchain, right? So why is that important? Like, we are in LA, at least I am. So it's like kind of a media and entertainment thing. Why is that important? A, you can track the bandwidth. B, you can track, what the actual content was. C, you can monetize that content properly. So if you think about syndication, how many plays did it get in essence? Because if you think about content creators or writers or, in that TV arena, how is that, okay, I wrote the show, it went on TV, how am I getting constantly monetized? Or if you did a movie, that's another one where, okay, I wrote the movie and now I have some royalties around the movie. How am I getting monetized? How is my content continuously being monetized? Or if you wrote a song, that's another one. I work with some musicians. That's a very common one where, okay, there's rights around music. How do we divide the rights up and say Barb wrote it, Dave wrote it, Mark wrote it, and now everyone gets their portion of the revenues coming from that. Right now, that's very not transparent. Some of those things are just not transparent. And I think one of the powers of the blockchain, which David has brought out, which I'm glad he's brought that out, is that the transparency of it, the fact that anyone can look at it, and the fact that it's just available, publicly available, can help it create more trust, right? Because you can just go look at it. Right now, some of these systems are very opaque, like you don't know, it's just a box or a black box, or it's this company and you just have no idea. And I think some of the power of the blockchain and the trust pieces of it is the fact that it has that full transparency.
It's interesting, before you go, David, my middle son's an actor, and I remember when he started out, SAG would send checks for little commercials he did of like 93 cents or something.
Yeah.
And the stamp it doesn't make sense to even do it. But he had no clue what was happening. In fact, even to this day, a lot of actors and whatnot, the stuff comes in and they haven't calculated it exactly. So it's an interesting point. David?
Yeah, so I would say, yeah, the story of blockchain so far is, I think we've gone through at least one period of hype that was the 2017, 2018, 2019 period, and then there was a crash and then the trough of disillusionment. But the two things that I continue to watch for, one is I am seeing pioneering efforts in the healthcare space. And that's the case where, again, you don't want the data to be available to everybody, but you want to be able to have that choice about when and where you share your medical record. There's still some big challenges, particularly here in the United States, where right now we have a duopoly of really just two major electronic medical record systems. And until you figure out how to interface with those, it's going to be hard to have innovation in that curve. But we're living in an age in which there's increasingly the capabilities of personalized medicine, synthetic biology, people that want to be able to do clinical trials because they're looking for different therapies to help them with whatever they might have. And if we can try and reduce that from taking 6 years to build a clinical trial to being 9 months, and make sure we're doing so with people's consent, making sure we're doing with their awareness, that can actually uplift and benefit people's lives. The other thing that I'm tracking that hasn't happened yet, but I'm tracking, is in the agricultural space. There is a desire to have essentially farm to table and have the ability to say, it was grown in this field, it was transported by this method, it was eventually brought to this market where you then bought it. That would eventually allow actually for you to actually see what was the carbon exhaust that was associated with producing that and what brought it to you. You could also understand how locally produced it was or not, and have some awareness of that as well. And that hasn't happened yet. But I know there are some pioneering efforts in that space. And so I would say watch this space for when we can begin to use these same technologies of distributed ledger and immutable audit logs to inform supply chains. Now, there's still going to be some needs for innovation to happen on terms of scaling this, again, getting past 1 million nodes, trying to make sure that we can get rid of some of the overhead and the challenges of scaling. But again, that's something that I think we can work through as we think about the technologies, and whether that's blockchain, whether that's edge-directed graphs or some other approaches as well that are sort of spin-offs of the same sort of technology. I think we will see over the next 5 to 10 years a push to, as much as the internet has already been decentralized in some respects, it has gravitated back to centralization in some cases, because that's just the natural market forces. I think we're going to see another push for, whether it's decentralized finance, decentralized agriculture, decentralized healthcare, a desire for people to have that. And I think it fundamentally gets back to a need for people to feel like they have some choice, some transparency, and trust in what's being done, as opposed to monolithic solutions that are being provided.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I wanted to ask 2 more quick questions. I meant to ask this before. Do you think the supply chain crisis right now would be different if we were totally immersed in blockchain already?
I think we would know, right? So I worked with a lot of clean tech companies, and they need parts, or IoT companies, they need parts, right? I need parts for my fill in the blank. I think you would know faster, right? But does that solve the problem? No. So I think David's point of kind of the farm to table, if you think about supply chain, is my chip, it's almost the same. Like, can I track my chip from the factory to the landed area, right? Did it get to or is it still on the cargo ship? So we're not 100% there yet. Would it solve the problem? No, because we still have these ships, right? We still have these things that have to transport. But the knowledge of where it is would be powerful, right? I think right now, no one knows where their parts are. Like, we had some people, they were waiting for their fully completed products, and it's like delay, we just got it shipped from here, XYZ, right? So now it's on a ship. So they go to the port of LA. Okay, there's a delay there. And so how do you really know as a manufacturer, as the person creating the product, that it actually got on the ship, it actually is in the port, it actually is out of the boat, or or onto the dock, or however, and now is it in the truck? You don't really know. So I mean, a blockchain can help track it, but it can't really solve the problem. You would know, but you would know. So as far as, like, if David had ordered something from me and I was creating something for him in that way, I could say, hey, David, I see that it's on the boat and it's late. And I think right now they just have no idea, right?
David?
I agree with Barbara. I
Is
mean,
more powerful.
yeah, I think we'd have more information. It wouldn't necessarily solve the problem, but I think the other thing that we're facing is companies don't know how vulnerable their supply chain is to the disruption that we're now experiencing. I mean, they're feeling it now, but had they gone through the process of digitizing and creating that awareness, they could have said, look, there's this one part that we only get from one supplier half a world away. And if that supplier is not able to get it to us, we're going to be up the creek without a paddle for all these other things we want to do. Maybe we should look for additional suppliers. And so that may have been a forcing function to create markets for additional suppliers that were either local, or at least so that you weren't dependent on a single supplier. And I think there's also the reality that right now companies see awareness of their supply chains as being a competitive advantage. And so they hoard the information to themselves. And that makes entire sectors vulnerable. And I come from this again from wearing the lens of national security and government, but we've seen in the last few months ransomware attacks on agriculture and different agricultural firms. But that's something where we don't really know that if this gets taken out and this gets taken out and this gets taken out, sure, maybe each one of them is an impact of maybe 2 to 5% to the market. But if you take out all 3 collectively, maybe now you're looking at a 45 to 50% impact. Yeah. And so if we're looking to a world that is both more resilient to shocks, but also more adaptable to how we need to change, whether it's from what we produce, but also climate change as well, I think we're going to have to motivate and encourage digitization of supply chains, which could at least give us transparency to where our vulnerabilities are, and also maybe lead to new market opportunities, because people will realize I'm really dependent on this one thing. Maybe I do need to look to other suppliers to actually motivate and create that market as well.
And to
Cool.
follow up on that though, you know, it impacts the little, you know, like the smaller companies more than the bigger companies. At least the supply chain shock piece, right? Because
Yes.
you're Apple, you can basically go and demand, I want all these chipsets. If you're like, you know, Joe Startup who's trying to, or Joe Young Company or Joe Medium Sized Company that's trying to, you know, utilize some of the same or similar parts, then, you know, you don't have that power. But I agree with you too. So a lot of those larger companies had already moved their supply chains around from the kind of 2018 thing that happened.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a small company and you just know I'm going to go to China and I'm going to get my thing from here, I mean, from a transparency side, it would be nice to know, like, oh, Apple's ordering here, maybe I should go find something else, right? But you don't really know that until you get there, and then you kind of find out, like, oh, and you may be stuck. You might have signed some contract as well.
Well, like we say in LA, we gotta leave them wanting more so we can do a sequel later. So that's always good. But last question. You know, one client told me once partway through 2021 about 2020. He said, you know, the year has flown by slowly, and I thought it was brilliant comment actually. But can you each tell me, you know, what you're most grateful for during the last year or two, and what you're most hopeful for next year? Barb?
I am grateful. You know, it's weird. You know, who knew there would ever be a global pandemic? But I am grateful for the opportunity to have kind of less technology in a way, right? Because everybody had to go online, and we all had to kind of figure out how to maneuver this digitized world. But, and I've kind of been in the digitized world. So I said, now I get to choose when I empower technology and when I do not. And it also gave me a lot more time to think about, you know, you know, how am I really interacting online versus offline? Like what do I really want to present online versus offline? And you know, I think that it gave a lot of people an opportunity to rethink and reimagine, you know, what is work, you know, what is important to them, what should you really be doing? Yeah, I went through that as well. So I'm grateful for that opportunity to kind of learn and grow more about myself.
And hopeful for?
Going forward, I mean, just doing what I'm doing, raising my fund and trying to get to the next level. So I'm just happy to be around every day. That's a good thing.
Cool. David?
Well, I'd amplify everything that Barbara said, and I would say over the last 12 to 18 months, I mean, you know, you never want a pandemic to happen, and you never want what's currently occurring in the world, but we are going to have more disruptions. I hate to say it. I mean, not to be, you know, that the nature as we go from 7.9 billion people on the planet to at least 9 billion people in a decade or more, you know, whether it's other pandemics, whether it's human caused shocks, whether it's vulnerabilities or things like that. I mean, you can't necessarily predict them. You can see them as low probability, high consequence events. But we're going to have this happen. So if anything, maybe this reminds us that we need to, one, be aware of both the humanness of ourselves and our planet, but also the connectivity we have to each other and our communities. And so maybe this is a dress rehearsal to get us ready for even bigger shocks in 2025, 2030, and how we want to position. I mean, you never hope they're going to happen, but again, I come from a world in which I've done national security for about the last 25 years, and we see things on the horizon that we hope never happen. If we're successful, you never hear about it, and that's great, but it's about preparing. What am I hopeful for? That we can use both this moment, sort of as Barbara said, we can use this moment, but also the digital technologies that we are rolling out to serve as a mirror to ourselves as individuals, as people, as communities. We've got some things that historically have not been fixed that need to be fixed. We've got some inequalities that need to be fixed, and they've gone unfixed for a while. we humans are fundamentally flawed, and that's no fault of anybody. That's just the nature of the evolutionary selection pressures that produced us. I jokingly say, and I also say this half seriously, that the 7 deadly sins are evolutionary advantages to the individual that are harmful to communities when you're not just in your immediate family members. And so we have to overcome that. We have to overcome our biases. We have to overcome our self-interest to sort of have self-interest that's healthy, but balance it with the self-interest of the community that is larger than ourselves, the world that is larger than ourselves, species beyond ourselves, and ecosystems beyond ourselves. And that's hard, because that is going against basically the last 250,000 years of human evolution, where we only met 80 people in our entire lifespan, and they were mainly our main immediate family members. So I am hopeful that we can seize everything that's happened, and you sort of embody this, Mark, with what you do with Leaders Who Care and the initiatives that you do, to sort of find ways to have a network effect, to use what's happened, to use technology that's present in the world to hold mirrors up to ourselves and say, where do we want to go together with intentionality, so that 2025, 2030 and beyond is better than what it could have been if we had done nothing at all.
Well said. You know, I compare a lot of things to sports. It's a lot more fun winning a championship with a team than necessarily by yourself. So, hey, I really appreciate you guys. You truly are Leaders Who Care. I learned something from you every time I speak to you. It's almost scary in a way, but I appreciate it. And so thank you so much again for joining us, and we'll definitely speak soon.
Thank you, Mark.
Mark.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, David.